Hi.
How are you
Good
doing?
evening. Good evening. How are you? Which part of Australia are you in?
I'm in Switzerland right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, right. So you're probably a couple of hours behind us, two and a half as well.
Yeah, exactly. 3 hours typically from Dubai. Yeah.
So, I guess you're born in Denmark, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you just tell us a little bit about your growing up years in Denmark?
Sure, of course. No, when I was a kid, I loved Lego. So I built my own Lego land in the backyard of my mom and dad's garden. And what
Uh-huh.
happened was that no one showed up except my mom and dad. So what happened was I went down to the local print office and I
Right.
persuaded them to put an ad in the paper. And 2 days later, I had 131 visitors visiting my Legoland. Only problem was that visitor number 130 and visitor number 131 were the lawyers from Lego suing me. They said it was their brand. I said, no, it's my brand, it's my boxes. So what happened was that we came to an agreement, and in fact they gave me a job at Lego where as an intern was learning about the company. So that's how I began my life when I was 12 years of age. And since then I opened an advertising agency when I was 14, sold it to BBDO when I was 18. But everything I did was really to see the world through the eyes of a customer or a consumer. And that's the reason why I wrote the book The Ministry of Common Sense, because it's all about seeing the world from a different point of view, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can sense that from your early childhood days, you were very immersed and gravitated towards the world of brands and branding. What actually got you into it? Was it by accident? Was it by design?
I've always wanted to work with brands since I was 8, really. And I think the reason why is because I was so obsessed with Lego and was intrigued by the fact that I was so obsessed with Lego that I asked myself, how can something be so powerful? Now, I didn't know it was called a brand back then, but I later on realized, in fact, it was a brand. And that's where I began to study this whole topic. And in the end, actually managed to sort of become an expert in it. So I've been basically since I was 8, which is now 42 years of age. I've studied branding.
Wow. Wow. Your book Small Data came at a time when the entire talk around the zeitgeist was about big data, right? Did you sense it was actually a small nudge to brands saying that you're missing the wood for the trees?
I think the issue is that we are so obsessed with technology and data that we sometimes leave our brain somewhere else without really questioning or thinking about why things are the way they are. I mean, big data is all about correlation. And the best way for me to illustrate that is that a typical big data conclusion will be that the more umbrellas you sell, the more it rains. And small data is all about seemingly insignificant observations you make in people's lives. And I wrote a book about that called Small Data. And the idea is very simple. It is to ensure that we actually increasingly are taking the human factor into account. And I think that's around the reason why you'll see in the near future that the concept of empathy would be very big in business. Everyone will talk about it. Everyone will try to understand it. And they'll do that because they will realize we're losing it as we sit in front of Zoom or Skype or Teams. The human factor is disappearing. From a productivity point of view, we believe we're more productive than ever. But from an emotional point of view, from a happiness point of view, from a purpose point of view, from a creativity point of view, the numbers are falling dramatically. So I've always believed in small data and seeing the world from a different point of view, right?
Lovely. It's a done to death cliche, culture eating strategy for breakfast. Most of it is actually seem to be lip service. Do you agree with that?
I do think so. I do think when a company um, grows, what happens is that the company becomes less empathetic and more focused on surviving, meaning that they create up rules and regulations and red tape and guidelines.
The
And through
quarter
that,
to quarter existence.
yeah, exactly. And that helps them to fine tune the machine doing one thing. But as that happens, you also start to lose the sight from the outside in perspective. You start to see the world from inside out instead. You start to look at it from my point of view. Everyone is drinking of the same Kool-Aid, convinced that what they're doing is right. And slowly they're drifting away from the consumer. And so what you will see is that entrepreneurial companies are very empathetic, because the founders typically had an experience, himself or herself, which was so profound that they built a business around it. But as they are side railed, as all the legal stuff takes over, typically empathy disappears, and with that, common sense disappears, right?
Absolutely, which is what actually will be leading to in the book Ministry of Common Sense, right?
Exactly.
You have always placed a lot of emphasis on behavior slash neuroscience in your work with brands and organizations. What is the big trigger point for that?
The most important thing is for me to understand news sources which can reveal different aspects of us. We are very, very emotional and very irrational as people, but we don't want to admit it. And a good example is if you take the remote control. I mean, if it's flat for batteries, most of us will press extra hard to squeeze the last drop of battery out of it, right? That's
Absolutely.
deeply
Or maybe
irrational.
knock it on your hands.
Exactly. 85% of everything we do today is irrational. And that's something I discovered when I wrote the book called Biology, B-U-Biology, where we did the largest neuromarketing study in the world, scanning 2,000 consumers' brains using fMRI. What I've constantly come to realize is that if you ask people about something, you won't necessarily get the right answer. Not that people are lying, but people are not just aware. So that's the reason why I used neuroscience. That's the reason why I used different interview techniques. And there's a reason why I wrote the Ministry of Common Sense, because I realized that company cultures were shockingly bad and people couldn't say what they were thinking. They're afraid. It's called psychological safety. Professor Edmondson was the one coming up with the term, and really is the base idea of that we feel afraid of expressing how we feel. We're afraid of losing my job. So I thought for me just to look at consumers one thing, but if you have a huge company, every employee is representing the brand, the company. So why not look at that? And that's what I did with the Ministry of Common Sense.
Absolutely. You've published 7 books so far, Martin.
This is my 8th book, actually. Yeah.
Okay. And your, I think, classic Biology was termed by Time Magazine as a breakthrough in branding. So of all the 8 books that you've written, it's like asking a parent who's your dearest child, which one is your favorite?
I can't. I can tell you one thing, that is that the Ministry of Common Sense probably is one of the most profound books I've written, because it raises 2 topics which is in a severe crisis at the moment. And the one is that empathy levels are at an all-time low. If you go back to mankind, you'll notice the reason why we have survived as a species is because we are the only mammal having empathy. But a recent study by the Michigan University shows it's now dropped with 48% over the last decade among college students. So what it gives you an indication of is that if that disappears, common sense disappears. And that's what you saw the 6th of January in Washington, D.C., when certainly democracy was at a crisis in the United States. And what you see every day, because social media increasingly is a self-fulfilling bubble, which is self-reinforcing our own point of view. So what I'm saying with all this stuff is that we're getting to an existential crisis, in my opinion, because the reason why we survived as a species was because we could put ourselves in the footstep of a polar bear, whatever it might have been, and kind of predict what it would be doing. So Minister of Common Sense for me is a book which is not just pointing to a very, very essential question. It's also giving a very, very simple solution to it, which works. Ministries of Common Sense actually exist around the world. They've been built up in Standard Chartered Bank, which you're probably familiar with out of Dubai, but they also work in Maersk, in Swiss, and a range of other companies across the world. So what I'm saying to you is that we are at a stage right now where I feel this is very, very timely. But of course, Biology was a breakthrough book in terms of how marketing works. Brand Sense invented the term called sensory marketing. Biology invented the term called neuromarketing. I've written a book called Clicks and Mortar, which invented the term of clicks and mortar. So each of those books have, through history, hopefully impacted or influenced or inspired marketeers, and now a larger part of the global population to see the world through a different lens.
Yeah, another seminal work is actually Brand Washed as well, isn't it?
BrandWatch was the first book ever written about ethics in communication and in databases and marketing. And it's a book I wrote which was highly controversial because companies said to me, how dare you write about all the ethical issues in their industry? And I said to them, it's very simple, because if I don't write about it, someone else will. And when they do it, it's going to be really bad. At least I do it with a tongue in cheek. So I did raise the privacy issues big way before it actually happened in the world. And I also said, this is what you should do, dear company owner, to get your act in order, because if you don't do it, you can have a huge backlash from consumers.
Absolutely. When we consult here at ISD Global in Dubai, we actually tell brands that I think that the age and era of USP, the unique selling proposition for brands, is passé, and now it's the age of the UFP, which is a unique feeling proposition. What's your perspective on something like that?
Well, I introduced a term in 2008 called HSP, and really it was a holistic selling proposition. It is that you look at your brand almost like as it is a religion. One of those components in religion is all about a feeling. People will forget what you think, people will forget what you say, but they'll never forget what you felt. So that is part of the vocabulary of the HSP theory. And the theory was based on a neuroscience study we did where I visited religious leaders across the world. And I started to understand what are the components defining powerful religions. And guess what? Almost all religions have a lot of things in common. They're very good at storytelling. They're very good at having grandeur, thinking big. They have rituals. They have a clear enemy definition. They have a range of different elements which all have been consistent through thousands and thousands of years. So the HSP theory really is the theory which is taking all these things into account and which have been verified using neuroscience as well. So yes, I agree that the feeling proposition is right. I probably would put it under the construct because it's only one aspect of many aspects, right?
Absolutely. You have time for two more short questions?
No, I don't. Sadly, I don't. I have to run now. But okay. It's been wonderful connecting with you. I hope you have enough materials.
Thank you for talking to BrandKnew at ISD Global, Martin. I know you have the very best for the Ministry of Common Sense. We're dying to kind of lay our hands on the book, and we look forward to connecting with you again.
You are very welcome. Take care and good to meet you.